Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
Welcome back to another journey into the grim darkness of the far future. Today, we're exploring something that should be impossible, something that defies every law of the Imperium, every instinct of the Golden Guardians, and every expectation of the galaxy itself. We're asking a question that makes even the most seasoned law masters pause. What if the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own personal guardians, the 10,000 demigods who stand watch over the Golden Throne itself, found themselves fighting alongside Orks, those green-skinned, fungal warriors who live only for battle and the roar of combat? This isn't just unlikely. This is a scenario that breaks fundamental truths about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Custodians are perfection incarnate, each one a unique masterpiece of genetic engineering, but crafted by the Emperor himself with arts lost to time. The Orks are biological weapons, engineered millions of years ago by the Old Ones, designed for one purpose: endless war. These two forces represent opposite ends of creation's spectrum, and yet, in the vast darkness between the stars, where survival trumps all other concerns, even the impossible can become necessary. So settle in as we explore this hypothetical alliance, examining not just how it could happen, but what it would mean for the galaxy, for both factions involved, and for our understanding of what desperation can drive beings to do when faced with extinction itself. This is a story of gold and green, of precision and fury, of the ultimate warriors of mankind standing shoulder to shoulder with the galaxy's most successful Xenos race. This is the story of an alliance that should never have been, but perhaps, in the darkest hour, had to be. The Golden Sentinels, understanding the Adeptus Custodes. Before we can understand why this alliance would be so shocking, so fundamentally wrong by Imperial standards, we need to truly understand what the Adeptus Custodes are. These are not Space Marines. They are not simply enhanced humans in golden armor. They are something far beyond even the angels of death that most citizens of the Imperium know and fear. The Custodians were the Emperor's first great work, predating even the Thunder Warriors who helped him conquer Terra during the Unification Wars. Each Custodian begins as an infant, carefully selected from the noble houses of Terra, or identified through means known only to the 10,000 themselves. But what happens next is beyond anything done to create a Space Marine. Where the Astartes receive additional organs and undergo surgical enhancement, the Custodians are rebuilt from the molecular level upward. The Emperor himself designed each stage of their transformation, using genetic alchemy and biological engineering that has never been replicated, not even by the most skilled Mechanicus adepts. This process takes decades. An infant chosen to become a Custodian will not reach maturity until they have undergone countless procedures, each one rewriting their very genetic code, elevating them beyond humanity into something approaching the divine. The result is staggering. An average Custodian stands over 10 feet tall, weighing close to 1,600 pounds of pure muscle, bone harder than ceramite, and reflexes that operate at speeds that make even Astartes seem sluggish by comparison. But physical prowess is only the beginning. Each Custodian is also a scholar, a philosopher, an artisan, and a tactical genius. Their training encompasses not just the arts of war, but diplomacy, politics, investigation, and even assassination. Where Space Marines are conditioned to follow orders and function as part of a larger military machine, Custodians are taught to think independently, to question, to understand the larger strategic picture. They are meant to be the Emperor's companions, his counselors, not merely his soldiers. Their equipment matches their exceptional nature. Every piece of armor worn by a Custodian is custom crafted to their exact specifications, a work of art that takes years to complete, forged from auramite, and a golden metal rarer and more precious than any other substance in the Imperium. Their armor is stronger than the power armor worn by Space Marines. The craftsmanship involved in creating a single suit of Custodian armor is staggering. Master artificers spend decades learning the techniques required, and even then, each suit requires years of painstaking work. The armor isn't just protective equipment, it's a masterwork of art and engineering combined. Every plate is individually shaped to the wearer's body, every joint perfectly balanced to allow maximum mobility while providing complete protection. The auramite itself is worked in ways that even the mechanicus cannot fully replicate, using techniques that date back to the age of technology. When properly maintained, a suit of custodian armor can last for thousands of years, passing from one warrior to another as needed, though most custodians keep their armor until they fall in battle. Inside each suit, inscribed where none but the wearer will ever see them, are the names they have earned through acts of valor. Each name represents a specific deed, the defeat of a particular enemy, the saving of a specific life, the completion of a crucial mission. Some custodians have earned hundreds of names over their long service. The legendary Constantin Valdor, first Captain General of the Custodes, bore 1,932 names before the Siege of Terror during the Horus Heresy. Reading those names would take hours, and each one represented a moment where Valdor proved himself worthy of the Emperor's trust. These names are not just honors, they're a form of history, a record of service that stretches back through centuries or even millennia. When a custodian dies, their armor is carefully cleaned and prepared for the next warrior who will wear it. The names remain, creating a lineage of service that connects current custodians to their ancient predecessors. Some suits of armor bear names from custodians who fought during the Unification Wars, making them over 10,000 years old and priceless beyond measure. Their weapons are equally magnificent. The iconic Guardian Spear, carried by most custodian guards, is a power weapon so heavy that it would take several unenhanced humans just to lift it. Yet in the hands of a custodian, it becomes a blur of golden death, the powered blade capable of cleaving through armor with ease, while the integrated bolter picks off distant targets with perfect accuracy. Some custodians wield sentinel blades, shorter but no less deadly, while others carry weapons whose very nature is forbidden knowledge outside the 10,000. For 10,000 years, since the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne at the end of the Horus Heresy, the custodians have stood watch over him. They guard the Sanctum Imperialis, the throne room itself, and they decide who may enter his presence. Even inquisitors, those who wield nearly unlimited authority across the Imperium, must kneel before a custodian and wait for permission to approach the throne. Such is the authority of the 10,000. For most of those 10 millennia, the custodians rarely left Terra and almost never ventured beyond the Sol system. They had withdrawn from the wider Imperium, perhaps in shame at having failed to prevent the heresy, perhaps driven by an overwhelming need to protect their fallen master. Only in recent centuries, as the galaxy has darkened further and new threats have emerged, have the custodians begun to venture forth once more. When a shield host of custodians deploys to battle, it is recorded as an imperial victory before they even arrive. Such is their reputation, and such is the reality of their combat prowess. A single custodian is worth a dozen Space Marines, perhaps more. They move with inhuman grace and speed, their every motion precise, their every strike calculated to inflict maximum damage. In battle, they are the Emperor's wrath made manifest, golden angels of death who show no mercy to the enemies of mankind. But they are also bound by duty and honor to a degree that most cannot comprehend. Once they serve only the Emperor and the ideals he represents. They view themselves not as soldiers, but as guardians, not just of his physical form, but of his vision for humanity. Every action they take is measured against this responsibility. They do not simply follow orders. They evaluate whether those orders serve the Emperor's true purpose. This independence of thought, this philosophical depth, makes them exceptional commanders and strategists. It also makes the idea of them allying with Xenos, particularly Orks, almost incomprehensible. The custodians understand, perhaps better than anyone save the Emperor himself, that humanity must stand alone if it is to survive. The galaxy is hostile, filled with species that would see mankind exterminated or enslaved. Cooperation with aliens, even temporarily, goes against everything the Emperor taught during the Great Crusade. It violates the very purpose for which the Custodians exist. And yet, as we shall see, even the most fundamental beliefs can be challenged when the alternative is extinction. The Green Tide. Understanding the Orks. To understand why an alliance between Custodians and Orks seems so impossible, we must also understand what the Orks truly are. They are not simply savage aliens who love fighting. They are perhaps the most successful species in the entire galaxy, and their success comes from biological and psychological engineering that makes them the perfect warriors. The Orks were created over 60 million years ago by the ancient race known as the Old Ones. These were beings of such advanced technology and biological mastery that they could design entire species from scratch, crafting them for specific purposes in their war against the soul-eating Necrons and their star god masters, the Citan. The Orks, or rather their ancestors, the Krork, were designed to be the ultimate soldiers, aggressive, durable, and self-sustaining. What the Old Ones created was a masterpiece of bioengineering that has endured far longer than they themselves did. Modern Orks are simpler than their ancient Krork ancestors, who could grow to 12 meters tall and wore sophisticated armor, but they retain all the essential features that make them so dangerous and so incredibly difficult to eliminate. At the cellular level, Orks are a symbiotic fusion of animal and fungal organisms. Their green skin isn't just unusual coloration. It contains chlorophyll, allowing them to perform basic photosynthesis. This means Orks can survive with minimal food, reducing their logistical needs dramatically. They can keep fighting long after other species would have starved. Their blood is thick with fungal spores and has high chlorophyll content, giving it that distinctive green color while making them incredibly resilient to injury. An Ork's physiology is deliberately simplified compared to humans or other species. They lack many complex internal organs, with the fungal component of their biology handling functions that would require sophisticated systems in other creatures. This makes them extraordinarily hard to kill. Wounds that would be instantly fatal to a human might barely slow an Ork. They've been observed fighting with injuries that should have killed them, sometimes being stitched back together by their pain boys and returning to battle with barely any recovery time needed. But the most remarkable aspect of Ork biology is their reproductive cycle. Orks don't reproduce in any conventional sense. Throughout their lives, and especially when they die, Orks release millions of spores into the environment. These spores are incredibly hardy, capable of surviving in almost any conditions. Once they settle, they begin to grow, creating an entire ecosystem of orkoid life forms. First come the squigs, simple organisms that range from tiny to massive, serving various purposes from food to living weapons. These creatures are themselves remarkably diverse, with dozens of subspecies adapted for different functions. Attack squigs are living weapons, all teeth and aggression. Hair squigs are used for clothing and decoration. Face-eater squigs do exactly what their name suggests. Some squigs grow large enough to be used as mounts, while others remain small enough to be eaten in a single bite. Then snotlings emerge, tiny creatures barely reaching knee height on a human that tend to the growing fungus and squigs. These diminutive beings possess just enough intelligence to cultivate the fungal gardens that will feed the later stages of orkoid growth. They work instinctively, following genetic programming laid down millions of years ago by the Old Ones. Despite their small size and limited intelligence, snotlings are crucial to the orkoid life cycle. Without them, the ecosystem wouldn't develop properly, and the later stages would emerge malnourished and weak. Next come Gretchen, slightly larger and more intelligent, who serve as laborers and cannon fodder. Standing perhaps 3 to 4 feet tall, Gretchen possess enough cunning to operate simple machinery and follow orders, though they're constantly abused by their larger orc cousins. They build the initial structures, gather resources, and prepare the environment for the emergence of full-sized orcs. In battle, they're often herded forward as expendable troops, their deaths serving to reveal enemy positions and waste enemy ammunition. Finally, after all these preparatory stages have created a suitable environment, the orcs themselves emerge, fully grown and ready to fight. They don't emerge as infants requiring care, but as adolescent orcs already capable of violence. Within weeks, they'll be full-sized warriors eager for battle. This entire process, from the initial spore dispersal to the emergence of combat-ready orcs, can take as little as a few months under ideal conditions. This means that any world where orcs have fought, even if they were completely defeated, is infected with their spores. Within weeks or months, a new generation of orcs will rise from the soil. The only way to truly cleanse a world of orc infestation is to burn it down to bedrock, and even that might not be enough. It's one of the reasons the Imperium so often resorts to exterminatus when dealing with major orc invasions. Better to destroy the world than to let it become an eternal breeding ground for the greenskins. Beyond their physical characteristics, our orcs possess something that shouldn't exist, according to Imperial understanding of reality, a collective psychic field that isn't connected to the warp. The Old Ones, in their wisdom, blocked orcs from accessing the Imperium, preventing them from being corrupted by chaos. Instead, orcs generate their own psychic gestalt, a field of psychic energy that grows stronger with every orc present. This collective power has observable effects on reality. It's the reason orc technology works, despite appearing to be assembled from scrap metal and held together with hope and violence. An orc believes a pile of junk with some pipes and a trigger is a gun, and the gestalt field makes it so. Paint a vehicle red, and orcs believe it goes faster, so it does. This isn't conscious psychic manipulation. It's a fundamental aspect of how orcs interact with reality. The Green Tide's psychic field also amplifies their aggression and combat prowess. When orcs gather in large numbers for a great military campaign, what they call a great crusade of green fury, the psychic pressure builds to incredible levels. Orcs become larger, stronger, and more cunning. The biggest orcs grow to enormous size, becoming war bosses who lead through sheer physical dominance. And when enough orcs gather under a sufficiently powerful leader, the collective energy can affect entire star systems. Orc society is brutally simple but highly effective. Might makes right. The biggest orc is in charge, and if you think you're bigger, you challenge them. Leadership is earned through violence and maintained through constant demonstrations of superiority. And this creates a natural hierarchy where the strongest, smartest, and most successful orcs rise to positions of power. Orcs are divided into clans, each with its own characteristics and preferences. The Goths are brutal close combat specialists who eschew guns in favor of choppers and their own fists. The Bad Moons are wealthy, their teeth growing faster than other orcs, allowing them to buy the flashiest equipment. The Evil Suns are obsessed with speed, painting everything red and racing into battle. The Death Skulls are looters and scavengers, believing blue is lucky and taking anything not nailed down. The Blood Axes are cunning, more willing to use tactics, and even occasionally work with other species. The Snakebites are traditionalists, eschewing modern technology in favor of the old ways. Within these clans, orcs also sort themselves by their innate aptitudes, which are genetically encoded. Mechs have an instinctive understanding of technology. Painboys are natural surgeons, able to stitch orcs back together or attach new limbs with disturbing success. Weird Boys are psychers who channel the Gestalt field, often explosively. Commandos are naturally sneaky, somehow able to move silently despite being massive green brutes. These specializations mean orcs always have the skills they need within their population. For orcs, fighting isn't just what they do, it's why they exist. They find joy in combat that other species cannot understand. Battle is their art, their religion, their entertainment, and their purpose all rolled into one. They laugh as they charge into withering gunfire. They grin as they wrestle with creatures that could tear them apart. Oh, the chance of death doesn't frighten them, it excites them. After all, what could be better than a good fight? This mentality makes orcs incredibly dangerous, but also, paradoxically, somewhat predictable. They will always choose to fight when given the option. They respect strength and courage above all else. And while they have little patience for complex strategy, they possess a certain low cunning that should never be underestimated. An orc warboss might seem like a simple brute, but they didn't get to be the biggest orc by being stupid. The idea of custodians, the epitome of ordered, purposeful warfare, working alongside orcs, who embody chaos and the joy of violence for its own sake, seems like trying to mix water and oil. The philosophical divide is enormous, the cultural gap is unbridgeable, and yet, both are warriors at their core. Both understand combat in ways that less martial species cannot. And both, in their own ways, are perfect at what they do. Precedents. When enemies become allies. Before we construct our scenario of custodians and orcs fighting together, it's worth examining the precedents. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is defined by endless war, but history shows that even the most bitter enemies can find themselves on the same side when faced with threats neither can handle alone. Perhaps the most famous example in recent Imperial history is the alliance between Commander Dante of the Blood Angels and the Necron forces of the Silent King during the defense of Baal. The Blood Angels' home world was under siege by Hive Fleet Leviathan, one of the largest Tyranid invasions ever recorded. While wave after wave of bio-horrors crashed against the defenses, overwhelming even the legendary Space Marines of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. As the situation grew desperate, the impossible happened. Necron ships emerged from the void, ancient tomb ships of the Mefrit dynasty, led by Anrakir the Traveler. But they didn't attack the beleaguered defenders. Instead, they turned their weapons on the Tyranids. The Silent King himself, the last leader of the united Necron Empire from before their transformation into machine bodies, had recognized that the Tyranids posed an existential threat to all life in the galaxy, and thus to his dream of one day restoring flesh to his people. Commander Dante, after 10,000 years of service and having witnessed more horrors than most beings could imagine, has made a decision that would have seemed heretical under any other circumstances. He accepted the aid. Blood Angels and Necrons fought side by side, golden and silver warriors united against the chittering swarm. The alliance was brief, lasting only as long as the immediate threat. Once the Tyranids were driven back, both sides withdrew without further communication. But it had happened. The line had been crossed. The Eldar have also formed temporary alliances with Imperial forces on numerous occasions. During the fall of Cadia, when the forces of chaos threatened to tear the galaxy apart, Eldar from various craft worlds fought alongside Space Marines and Imperial Guard regiments. The Eldar weren't doing it out of love for humanity, as they were protecting their own interests and following the threads of prophecy that suggested humanity's survival was necessary for their own. But necessity made them allies, at least for a time. These alliances were never comfortable. Imperial soldiers who had spent their lives being taught that all Xenos were abominations to be purged struggled with fighting alongside them. The Eldar viewed their human allies as crude barbarians, little better than apes with guns. Yet they fought together, and in some cases, they fought well. Eldar Farseers coordinated with Space Marine commanders. Aspect warriors covered Imperial positions with precision fire. In the crucible of combat against overwhelming odds, a grudging respect sometimes emerged. Even orcs have precedent for temporary cooperation with other species, though these are rare and usually short-lived. The Blood Axes, the most cunning of the orc clans, have been known to hire themselves out as mercenaries. They've worked for human renegades, for other Xenos species, and even occasionally for the Imperium itself, though such arrangements are kept very quiet. During the Makarian Crusade, there are unconfirmed reports of Blood Axe mercenaries being employed by Imperial commanders in particularly desperate situations. The Orks were pointed at the enemy, promised a good fight and payment in weapons or scrap, and let loose. These arrangements were temporary and transactional. The Orks fought because they were getting what they wanted, and when the immediate battle was over, everyone went their separate ways, often shooting at each other again. The key element in all these alliances is necessity. They don't form because the parties involved suddenly develop mutual respect or shared ideals. They form because the alternative is worse. When faced with tyrannids that will devour all biomass, or chaos forces that will corrupt reality itself, even ancient hatreds can be temporarily set aside. But none of these precedents quite match what we're proposing. The Custodians aren't space marines. They are the Emperor's own companions, his personal guard, warriors who have stood in his presence and carry his will. They represent the pinnacle of the Imperial ideal, the perfect fusion of strength, intellect, and purpose. For them to ally with Xenos, particularly Orks, would require circumstances even more dire than those that drove Dante to accept Necron aid. It would require nothing less than the potential extinction of humanity itself, and perhaps even the death of the Emperor. The stakes would need to be absolute, and the threat would need to be immediate enough that there was no time for the careful deliberation and political maneuvering that usually accompanies Imperial policy decisions. It would need to be a moment when even the 10,000, with all their wisdom and foresight, could see no other path to survival. Let us construct such a scenario and explore how these two impossible allies might come together in the galaxy's darkest hour. The Catalyst, a threat beyond comprehension. Imagine, if you will, a moment in the closing years of the 41st Millennium. The Imperium is already stretched thin, fighting wars on 10,000 fronts. The Great Rift, that massive tear in reality that split the galaxy in half, has made travel and communication nearly impossible across vast swathes of space. Chaos incursions are increasing in frequency and ferocity. Tyrannid hive fleets probe the galaxy's edges from multiple directions. The Necrons are awakening in greater numbers, and internal strife threatens to tear the Imperium apart from within. Now add to this already apocalyptic situation something worse. Something that threatens not just the Imperium, but all life in the galaxy. Something that makes even ancient enemies reconsider their positions. Let us say that 3 catastrophes converge at once, each building upon the others to create a perfect storm of annihilation. First, a Tyrannid hive fleet of unprecedented size emerges from the void beyond the galaxy's edge. This isn't like the hive fleets previously encountered. This is something larger, as something that suggests the previous invasions were merely scouting forces. Billions of bioships darken the stars, and their trajectory is clear. They're heading directly for the Segmentum Solar, the heart of the Imperium, toward Terra itself. Second, the forces of chaos launch a massive coordinated assault. Every major warband, every traitor legion, and every demon prince who has been planning and preparing in the eye of Terra and the Great Rift suddenly moves with unified purpose. It's as if the dark gods themselves have put aside their eternal squabbles long enough to coordinate a single devastating strike. Their target is also the solar system, seeking to finish what Horus started 10,000 years ago. Third, and perhaps most devastating, the ancient technology holding the Golden Throne together finally begins to fail. While the Emperor has sat upon that life support throne for 10,000 years, his psychic might powering the Astronomicon that allows warp travel across the Imperium. But the device was never meant to function for so long. Irreplaceable components are wearing out. The Mechanicus has tried everything, but even their greatest tech priests cannot repair or replace what was built with knowledge from the dark age of technology. The Emperor's life is measured in days, perhaps weeks at most. And when he dies, the Astronomicon will go dark. Warp travel will become impossible across most of the Imperium. Humanity's greatest weapon against chaos, the Emperor's psychic power holding back the tides of the warp, will be gone. And the explosion of psychic energy, as his soul finally releases, could tear a hole in reality that makes the Great Rift look like a paper cut. In this moment, with Terra facing invasion from two directions while the Emperor himself dies, the Custodians face an impossible choice. They have perhaps 3 days before the Tyranid vanguard organisms reach the outer solar system, perhaps 4 days before the Chaos fleets translate into real space. And with the forces currently available in the Sol system, even with the Custodians fighting to the last, they cannot hold against either threat alone, let alone both simultaneously. They need more warriors, and they need them immediately. There's no time to recall Imperial forces from across the galaxy, no time to muster armies and transport them to Terra. The only forces close enough to make a difference are either already committed to other battles or are Xenos species that have their own territories near the solar system. And among those nearby forces is a massive Ork gathering. A great crusade of the Green Tide has been building in a nearby system. Orks from a dozen clans coming together under a particularly powerful war boss. They've been raiding Imperial worlds, yes, but they haven't yet launched their main assault. Estimates suggest there are millions of Orks in that system, with more arriving every day, all spoiling for a proper fight. Captain General Trajan Valoris, leader of the Adeptus Custodes and one of the High Lords of Terra, stands in the Tower of Hegemon, looking at strategic displays that paint an unmistakable picture of doom. His brilliant tactical mind, honed over centuries of warfare and study, runs through every possible scenario. Every option leads to defeat. The Imperium will fall, the Emperor will die, humanity will be devoured or damned. Every option except one. Around him, his fellow Custodians wait. They are not soldiers who blindly follow orders. Each one is capable of understanding the strategic situation fully. They can see what Valoris sees. They know what he's considering. And the very thought is anathema to everything they believe. One of them speaks, his voice carefully neutral. "There must be another way, Captain General. The Emperor would not wish us to sully his vision with such collaboration." Valoris doesn't turn from the displays.
I have to admit, writing the battle sequences for this was incredibly satisfying. Imagining Custodian precision combined with Ork fury, both directed at the same enemies, that's the kind of spectacle that makes me love this hobby. It also made me realize how much potential there is in exploring these what-if scenarios. Established lore is amazing, but sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that ask, what if everything we thought was impossible actually happened? That's the beauty of speculative lore. We get to explore ideas that Games Workshop might never officially touch. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Back to the story.
The Emperor's vision was for humanity's survival and eventual dominance. That vision dies if Terra falls. It dies if he dies without someone to carry on his work. It dies if the Astronomicon goes dark and the Imperium fragments into 10,000 isolated empires, each falling to Xenos or Chaos in turn. Another Custodian, one who has served for nearly 7,000 years, steps forward. To ally with the Greenskins, even temporarily, would be to betray the Imperial truth. It would violate the Great Crusade's core principle: humanity must stand alone. And if humanity doesn't stand at all? Valoris finally turns to face his companions. If we hold fast to our principles while Terra burns, while the Emperor dies, while everything he built crumbles to dust, are we being true to his vision, or are we being proud and foolish? The ancient Custodian considers this. What would we even offer them? How would we communicate the need? As the Orks are not rational actors who understand complex negotiations. Valoris gestures to the display, where the Ork gathering is marked in red. Orks understand fighting. They understand enemies. And they respect strength. We send an envoy. We offer them what they want most. The greatest battle they've ever known. Tyranids that will fight until every last organism is destroyed. Chaos forces that include greater demons and demon princes. A fight that will be remembered in their legends forever. And after? When the battle is won, assuming we survive, they will not simply leave. They will have fought alongside us. They will have seen terror. They will know the Imperium's heart is vulnerable. If we win, and that is far from certain. We will deal with that problem when it comes. Right now, I am looking at certain defeat against the two greatest threats humanity has ever faced, or possible victory with the aid of the one nearby force that might actually make a difference. Valoris pauses, then adds quietly, "The Emperor made difficult choices. He created us, his custodians, to make such choices in his name when he cannot. This is such a moment." The chamber falls silent. Every custodian present wrestles with the magnitude of what's being proposed. Finally, the ancient custodian nods slowly. "I pray we are not making a grave mistake, Captain General, but I see your logic. If we must bear this burden, we bear it together." Valoris allows himself a grim smile. "Prepare a strike cruiser. We make for the Ork system with all speed. And someone find me a translator who speaks their language. We're about to make the most disturbing proposal in Imperial history." And so, with time running out and the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, the impossible begins. The Golden Warriors of the Emperor prepare to speak with the Green Tide, to offer alliance to the very antithesis of everything they represent. The catalyst has struck. The impossible is about to become necessary. First contact. Gold meets green. The strike cruiser bearing Trajan Valoris and a small delegation of custodians translates into real space at the edge of the Ork-controlled system. The ship is magnificent, its hull gleaming gold even in the dim light of distant stars, covered in the eagles and lightning bolts of Imperial heraldry. It broadcasts on all frequencies, in low Gothic, high Gothic, and even some Orkish phrases painstakingly compiled by Imperial scholars who study Xenos languages. The message is simple. We come to speak with your war boss. We bring an offer of the greatest battle in the galaxy. Respond or be ignored as cowards. That last part is crucial. You don't politely request an audience with Orks. You challenge them, you provoke them, you make them curious. And the broadcast works. Within minutes, Ork ships, ramshackle constructions of metal plating, and excessive weaponry that somehow manage to function, begin to converge on the strike cruiser. On the bridge, Valoris watches the approaching vessels with the calm of someone who has faced worse threats. Beside him stands an unusual figure, a rogue trader's translator, one of the rare humans who has actually learned Orkish and survived multiple encounters with the greenskins. The man is nervous, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the climate-controlled environment. "The largest ship is making contact, my lord," reports one of the bridge crew. "Vox transmission coming through." The voice that fills the bridge is deep, rough, and carries the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "This is War Boss Grok Facer Stomper. Who's to get telling me to come have a chat, and why shouldn't I just blow you out of the sky for getting in me way?" The translator begins to interpret, but Valoris raises a hand to stop him. "Tell him this. I am Trajan Valoris, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, Guardian of the Emperor of Mankind, and I come to offer him a fight so large, so brutal, as so absolutely magnificent that his name will be remembered by every Ork in the galaxy for the rest of time." The translator looks like he might faint, but manages to render this into passable Orkish. There's a long pause on the other end of the transmission. Then unexpectedly, laughter. Deep, booming laughter that sounds genuinely amused. "A humie dat knows what Orks wants to hear. All right, you got me interest. Come down to me ship. But if this is some kind of trick, I'll use you for target practice." "Acceptable," Valoris says simply. 20 minutes later, Valoris and 5 other custodians stand in the launch bay of a ship that can only charitably be called functional. The air reeks of promethium fumes, unwashed Orks, and something that might be cooking meat. The deck is stained with substances best not examined too closely. And surrounding them are Orks, dozens of them, all armed, all watching the golden armored giants with expressions that mix curiosity with the desire to test them in combat. The custodians are barely 2/3 the height of the largest Orks, but there's something about them that gives even these naturally aggressive Xenos pause. Perhaps it's the way they move, with perfect balance and coiled readiness. Perhaps it's the quality of their armor, which makes even the flashiest Ork gear look crude. Or perhaps it's simply that the Custodians show no fear whatsoever, meeting the Orks' stares with calm evaluation. Warboss Gruk Fast Stomper is massive even by Ork standards, nearly 12 feet tall and wrapped in armor that's been welded together from a dozen different sources. But he carries a power claw that could crush a tank and a custom shooter that's probably been looted from multiple weapons. When he speaks, the deck vibrates. "So, Shiny Gits, what's this about a fight?" Valoris steps forward, and the translator hurries to keep up. 3 days from now, the solar system, the heart of the human Imperium, will be attacked by 2 forces. One is a tyrannid hive fleet larger than anything previously seen. Billions of bioorganisms, all wanting nothing but to consume and adapt. The other is every major Chaos Warband and Demon Legion attacking simultaneously. He pauses to let the translator convey this, watching the warboss's face. Gruk's expression shifts from skeptical to interested. Either force alone could destroy our defenses. Both together will overwhelm us unless we have more warriors. My proposal is simple. You bring every Ork in this system, every Ork you can call upon, to Terra. We fight these 2 forces together. When it's over, assuming any of us survive, you leave and we never speak of this again. The translator finishes, and then adds in a whisper to Valoris, "My lord, you're asking him to help defend Terra. Orks don't typically defend things." "Then I'm not asking him to defend. I'm offering him the opportunity to be in the middle of the biggest, most violent fight in galactic history. If he happens to be shooting in the same direction as us, that's incidental." Gruk considers this, scratching his chin with his non-clawed hand. "Let me get this straight. You're telling me that in 3 days, you're going to have billions of bugs and all the Chaos Boys in the galaxy all coming for a scrap at the same place? Oh, and you want me Orks to show up for it?" "Yes. And we get to fight whatever we want, as long as it ain't you lot?" "Yes. And afterwards, assuming we ain't all dead, we just go our separate ways?" "Yes." Gruk breaks into a massive grin, his tusks gleaming. This is the best offer any Humie's ever made me. Course we'll come. We was gonna have to find something good to fight soon anyway, and this sounds proper brilliant." But then his expression turns crafty. "But here's the thing, Shiny Boss. How do I know you're not lying? How do I know this ain't just some trick to get me boys in one place so you can blow us all up?" Valoris doesn't hesitate. "Because I'm here, in person, in the middle of your fleet, with 5 of my brothers. If I meant you harm, I would have sent a message, not come myself. And because you know that this offer is insane enough that it has to be true, no one would invent such a lie." The warboss studies him for a long moment. Despite the vast differences between them, there's a kind of communication happening here that transcends language. Both are warriors. Both understand combat at a fundamental level. Both can recognize desperate necessity when they see it. Finally, Gruk nods. "All right, we got a deal. But I got conditions. First, when we show up, your boys don't shoot at us. Second, we get first pick of any loot from the wreckage. Third," he leans down, bringing his massive face close to Valoris's helmet, "if any of your gits even thinks about betraying us, I'll personally come find you and give you a proper Orky introduction to my claw." "Agreed," Valoris says without flinching. "Oh, but understand this. If your Orks start fighting my forces instead of our common enemies, I will kill you personally. And unlike your fellows, Orks, I will only need to do it once." The room erupts in roars of approval from the watching Orks. They respect this kind of direct talk, this mutual threat that acknowledges both sides are dangerous. Gruk laughs again and extends his non-clawed hand. "Deal. Now get off me ship before I change me mind. And Humie, this better be as good as you say, or I'm coming back for a rematch." As the Custodians return to their strike cruiser, the translator is shaking. "My lord, we just allied with Orks. This is heresy of the highest order." "Yes," Valoris agrees calmly. "It probably is. But sometimes heresy is the price of survival. And if we fail, there will be no one left to judge us anyway." Back in the solar system, preparations begin for the strangest alliance in Imperial history. And in the Ork system, Gruk faces Stomper, bellows orders to his subordinates to gather every ship, every boy, every gun they can find. They're going to Terra. They're going to the biggest fight in the galaxy. This is going to be legendary. The alliance forms. Logistics of the impossible. The 3 days between first contact and the arrival of both enemy fleets pass in a whirlwind of activity that would seem impossible under normal circumstances. But these are not normal circumstances, and what's being attempted has never been done before in the Imperium's history. The first challenge is simply informing the Imperial defenders what's about to happen. When Valoris returns to Terra and convenes an emergency meeting of the available High Lords and military commanders, the reaction is about what you'd expect. Shock, horror, and immediate accusations of heresy and madness fill the chamber. The inquisitorial representative nearly has an apoplectic fit. "You've doomed us all," the Inquisitor shouts. "The moment those Xenos see Terra, they'll never leave. They'll know the location of the Emperor himself. This is betrayal of everything we stand for." Valoris lets him finish, then responds with devastating calm. The alternative was certain defeat. Against the forces approaching, we had perhaps a 15% chance of holding long enough to evacuate the Emperor to another location, assuming we could find a way to move him without killing him. With the Orks, our odds improved to perhaps 40%, still poor, but significantly better than extinction. Another High Lord, the Fabricator General of Mars, speaks up. "Have you considered what this does to morale? How do we explain to our defenders that they're fighting alongside Xenos? How do we prevent them from shooting the Orks on sight?" We don't explain it. We give orders. Every military commander in the solar system is being briefed now. The green-skinned Xenos are, for the duration of this battle only, to be treated as temporary allies. They are not to be fired upon unless they attack Imperial forces first. Any soldier who disobeys this order will be executed immediately. The room erupts in protests, but Valoris cuts through them. "We don't have time for debate. The Tyranids will be here in 2 days. The Chaos Forces in 3. The Orks will arrive in approximately 1 day. We need to be ready. I need every available ship moved into defensive positions. I need every gun on Terra and Mars charged and ready. And I need someone to explain to the Mechanicus Manufactorums that they're about to see something they've never seen before, and they're not to investigate it with extreme prejudice." In the end, it's the Fabricator General who asks the question they're all thinking. "And if we survive this, Captain General, what then? How do we live with what we've done?" Valoris meets his gaze steadily. "We live with it the same way we live with every other compromise necessary for survival. We remember that the Emperor himself made alliances of convenience when needed. We remember that the Great Crusade utilized Xenos technology when appropriate. And we remember that dead men have no principles. The next challenge is tactical coordination. How do you integrate a horde of Orks into a defensive strategy? The answer, after considerable thought, is that you don't. The Custodians, along with the Imperial Navy and the various Space Marine chapters present in the system, will handle the actual defense. The Orks will be pointed at concentrations of enemies and told to do what they do best, fight with overwhelming aggression. Valoris meets with his senior strategists, spreading tactical displays across the chamber. The Tyranids will approach from the galactic east. They'll likely split their forces, with vanguard organisms probing our defenses, while the main fleet waits to exploit any weakness. The Chaos Forces will come from the direction of the Great Rift, or almost certainly with warp-spawned entities leading the assault. He highlights different zones. We concentrate our naval forces here and here, creating killing fields. The planetary defense arrays on Terra and Mars will focus on the Tyranid bioships. Their organic nature makes them vulnerable to certain weapon types. The Orks, he pauses, considering. The Orks will be held in reserve until we see where the main push comes from. Then we release them directly into the thickest fighting. One of his subordinates, a custodian named Valdius, who has served for 4,000 years, raises a concern. The Orks won't maintain formation. They won't follow complex tactical instructions. Once they're in the fight, they'll do what they want. I know, Valoris acknowledges. That's why we're not giving them complex instructions. We tell them where the enemy is, and we let them loose. Their aggression becomes a weapon we aim rather than control. And if they break through to Terra's surface, then we hope they're more interested in fighting tyrannids and demons than pillaging the Imperial Palace. It's not a reassuring answer, but it's the only honest one available. The Orks arrive ahead of schedule, because of course they do. Their fleet translation into real space is messy and chaotic, with some ships appearing millions of kilometers from where they should be, but they all make it. Hundreds of Ork vessels, from massive cruisers covered in guns, to smaller ships that look like they might fall apart at any moment, fill the space around Terra's outer defense sphere. Imperial defenders stare at their Auspex screens in disbelief. The targeting solutions that would normally be automatically calculated and fired are held back by direct orders from the Captain General. Ships that have never let an Ork vessel come within weapons range now watch them approach their position without resistance. On the flagship of the Ork fleet, Grukfasestompa surveys the human defenses with approval. Look at all dem ships. Humies sure know how to gather up a proper scrap. Now where's dem enemies your boss promised? As if in answer to his question, alarms begin to sound throughout the Imperial fleet. Long-range Auspex has detected the Tyrannid vanguard. Shadow in the warp, the psychic emanation that blocks warp-based communication and dims the light of the Astronomicon, begins to wash over the outer system. Where ships that rely on psychic navigators suddenly find their abilities compromised. Across the fleet, astropaths scream and die as the hive mind's presence overwhelms their defenses. But the Orks feel nothing. They can't be touched by the shadow in the warp because they don't use the warp in the same way. Their collective psychic field is separate, independent. If anything, being surrounded by so many Orks is actually making them stronger, not weaker. Valoris, standing on the bridge of his flagship, watches the approaching Tyrannid fleet on his displays. Billions of bioships, from small spore mines to massive hive ships, creating a wall of living matter that blocks out the stars. He activates the fleet-wide Vox. All Imperial forces, this is Captain General Valoris. The enemy is here. Every man, woman, and custodian will do their duty. As we fight not just for the Imperium, but for our very species' survival. The Emperor protects. Then, on a separate channel to the Ork fleet. Warboss Facestomper, your enemy approaches from heading 270. They number in the billions and will not stop until everything is consumed. Show them what Orks do to things that try to eat them. Gruk's laugh echoes across the channel. Now that's what I'm talking about. Boys, time to show these bugs who's the best fighters in the galaxy. Charge! And just like that, impossible as it seems, the Alliance is tested in battle. Golden ships and green ships, Custodian guardians and Ork warriors, all facing the same enemy, all fighting for survival, even if they're doing it for completely different reasons. The logistics are a nightmare. The command structure is barely functional. All the chances of friendly fire are astronomical. And yet, as the first waves of Tyrannids slam into the combined defense, something remarkable happens. It starts to work. United in battle, the impossible made real. The first contact between the Tyrannid vanguard and the combined Imperial Ork fleet erupts with a violence that defies description. Bioships the size of cities spew forth millions of gargoyles and termagants, living weapons that fill space like a swarm of locusts. Behind them come larger organisms, Tyrannofexes with biocannons capable of melting through ship hulls, Hierophants that can tear apart destroyers with their massive claws, and Trigons that burrow through the void itself, using abilities that shouldn't exist outside the warp. The Imperial fleet responds with disciplined precision. Macro cannons fire in coordinated volleys, creating kill zones through which the Tyrannid organisms must pass. Lance batteries track and eliminate the largest threats, their energy beams slicing through chitin armor. Torpedo spreads blanket entire sectors, each explosion taking out dozens or hundreds of smaller organisms. And then, The Orks hit the Tyranid flanks like a green avalanche. Where the Imperial ships fight with precision and coordination, the Orks attack with pure, joyous aggression. Their ships ram directly into Tyranid vessels, crews already boarding before the impacts finish echoing through the hulls. Massive weapons cobbled together from salvaged parts, and Ork ingenuity fire without regard for heat buildup or ammunition conservation. If a gun explodes, the Orks just find another one. If a ship starts breaking apart, they hold it together with their collective belief that it should keep working. From the bridge of his flagship, Valoris watches the battle unfold with the calm of someone who has seen countless engagements but has never witnessed anything quite like this. The tactical displays show a confused mess of green and red markers, Orks and Tyranids, intermingling, while gold markers, Imperial forces, maintain formation and fire support. "They're actually doing it," Valdius says beside him, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "The Orks are drawing the Tyranids' attention away from our gun positions. They're acting as a mobile assault force while we provide fire support." More accurately, Valoris corrects, the Tyranids are going after the Orks because they represent the highest concentration of biomass that's fighting back. And the Orks are happy about this because it means more enemies to fight. We're benefiting from a happy accident of competing priorities. But accident or not, it's effective. The Tyranids, drawn by the hive mind's insatiable hunger and tactical cunning, concentrate their forces on the Ork ships. They've calculated, in whatever passes for thought in their alien consciousness, that the Orks represent both a major threat and a source of genetic material worth harvesting. The aggressive, endlessly adaptable greenskins would make excellent material for creating new bioforms. What the hive mind doesn't fully account for is how much Orks love this kind of fight. Every Tyranid that boards an Ork ship finds itself in brutal close combat against opponents who are stronger, tougher, and more than happy to trade blow for blow. As the Tyranids adapt and evolve, yes, but Orks were designed by the Old Ones specifically to fight creatures like this. In the corridors of Ork vessels, the boarding actions turn into meat grinders that consume both sides with abandon. Meanwhile, the Imperial ships maintain their disciplined fire. Lance batteries target Tyranid synapse creatures, the organisms that coordinate the hive mind's forces. Without these coordinators, the smaller Tyranids become confused and easier to kill. Bombers from the Imperial Navy launch precision strikes against bioship weak points, exploiting the fact that for all their biological perfection, Tyranids still have vulnerabilities that can be targeted and destroyed. Then there's the moment that becomes legend among both sides, though they'll tell it differently. A massive hive ship, one of the largest organisms in the Tyranid fleet, breaks through the initial defensive line and makes for terror itself. Its intent is clear. It will disgorge its cargo of billions of organisms onto the homeworld of humanity, beginning the consumption of the species. Imperial ships move to intercept, but it's too large, too well armored. Even concentrated fire barely scratches its outer carapace. Then Warboss Gruk Fasestomper makes a decision that's either brilliant or insane, possibly both. He orders his entire flagship, already heavily damaged from multiple boarding actions, to ram the hive ship at full speed. His crew, rather than questioning this suicidal order, roars its approval. This is exactly the kind of gloriously violent end that Orks dream about. The collision is catastrophic. The Ork ship hits the hive ship's flank with enough force to crack a continent. Both vessels begin to break apart, spilling their contents into space. But Gruk and his elite warriors are already charging through the breach, power claws and choppers cutting through Tyranid flesh as they penetrate deeper into the living ship. From the Imperial flagship, Valoris watches this unfold. They're boarding it. The Orks are actually boarding a hive ship during active combat. "Recommended action?" asks his tactical officer. "Target that hive ship with everything we have. If the war boss is insane enough to give us this opportunity, we'd be fools not to take it." The full might of the Imperial fleet's heavy weapons converges on the wounded hive ship. Lance strikes pierce through its already compromised armor. Torpedo volleys hammer into exposed organ clusters. And inside, Grook and his boys are tearing apart the ship's internal structure, fighting their way toward what they instinctively recognize as the creature's brain or command center. The hive ship tries to regenerate, tries to adapt, but it can't recover from damage coming from both outside and inside simultaneously. With a final psychic scream that causes astropaths across the system to clutch their heads, the massive organism dies, breaking apart into chunks that drift through space. And from the wreckage, battered but alive, Grook and a few dozen of his toughest boys emerge, using pieces of the dead ship as improvised spacecraft to return to the Ork fleet. When he's recovered and back in command, his first transmission is, "That was brilliant. Can we do that again?" But the battle is far from over. The Tyranid main fleet is arriving now, wave after wave of bioships that seem to have no end. And on the opposite side of the system, reality is beginning to tear as the Chaos forces prepare to enter real space. The Custodians deploy in force for the first time in millennia. Companies of Golden Warriors board their spacecraft and prepare for combat operations. Valorous himself will lead them, because this is what Custodians do. They don't hide behind fleets and order others to fight. They stand at the front, guardian spears in hand, and they show the enemy what the Emperor's finest can do. As the Chaos forces begin their translation, tearing holes in reality through which demonic entities and corrupted ships pour, the Custodians strike. But their ships move with precision that makes them seem like they're performing a deadly dance. Every shot finds its target. Every maneuver puts them in the optimal position to exploit enemy weaknesses. And when Chaos Space Marines board a disabled Custodian ship, thinking they've found easy prey, they discover too late that Custodians are even more terrifying in close combat than they are at range. The Golden Warriors move through the corrupted traitors like death itself, each one worth a squad of enemy champions. Chaos Marines who have fought for 10,000 years, who have survived countless battles and bear the gifts of the Dark Gods, fall before Custodian blades like wheat before the scythe. The Orks, seeing the Chaos forces arriving, are overjoyed. 2 enemies to fight. This is even better than promised. Yet they surge toward the new threat, with the same enthusiasm they showed against the Tyranids. And suddenly the Chaos forces find themselves caught between precision Imperial fire and the Green Tide's unstoppable assault. A bloodthirster, one of Khorne's greater demons, manifests in the middle of the battle. The massive demon, easily 40 feet tall and radiating hatred that makes mortal minds crack, swings its axe through space itself, cutting reality as it aims to tear open the veil and allow more of its kind through. 3 Custodians engage it immediately, their movements coordinated, despite the 3 of them never having spoken a word of planning. They attack from 3 different angles, forcing the demon to divide its attention. Their guardian spears pierce through demonic flesh with each strike, the weapons blessed with the Emperor's own power, making them anathema to warp spawn. But then, a mob of Ork knobs arrives, having spotted what they recognize as the biggest enemy in the immediate area. Without hesitation or communication with the Custodians, they charge the bloodthirster from another angle. Power claws clash with demonic axes. Ork strength, enhanced by the gestalt field of billions of greenskins all fighting at once, proves able to actually harm the greater demon. For a few moments that seem to stretch into eternity, Custodians and Orks fight side by side against the bloodthirster. Neither side acknowledges the other. They don't coordinate or communicate. But they both recognize a dangerous enemy, and they both know how to kill it. When the demon finally falls, banished back to the warp with a scream of rage, and the Custodians and Orks simply moved their next targets without looking at each other. The battle rages for 18 hours. 18 hours of constant combat across 3 different fronts, as Tyranids, Chaos forces, and the combined Imperial Ork defense clash in a conflict that will be remembered for centuries. Ships are destroyed by the hundreds. Millions of orcs die and are happy about it. Thousands of tyrannid organisms are slain for each orc that falls. Demons are banished back to the warp, only to reform and return for another assault. And through it all, Terra stands. Battered, bloodied, its outer defenses in ruins, and its orbital stations damaged beyond quick repair, but standing. The Astronomicon flickers, but doesn't die. The Golden Throne holds. The Emperor endures. As the last tyrannid organisms are eliminated or driven back into the void, and the Chaos forces withdraw to regroup for another assault, an exhausted silence falls over the combined fleet. Ships drift in space, their crews either celebrating survival or tending to the wounded. Debris fields mark where hundreds of vessels died, creating a graveyard that will orbit Terra for centuries. On the surface of Terra itself, in the Tower of Hegemon, Valoris receives damage reports and casualty assessments. The numbers are staggering. The Imperium lost 30% of its defensive fleet. Casualty estimates among ship crews run into the millions. 3 entire Space Marine chapters were wiped out to the last man, but they held. Against impossible odds, they held. And a not insignificant part of that survival was due to the green-skinned Xenos who fought with a fury that matched or exceeded anything the Imperium could muster. The question now is, what happens next? Cultural bridge. Understanding through war. In the aftermath of the battle, there is a period of strange quiet. The Orks, having expended most of their ammunition and damaged many of their ships, don't immediately depart. They need time to loot the debris fields, to gather materials for repairs, to tend to their wounded, which in Ork terms means stitching them back together and getting them ready for the next fight. The Imperial forces, similarly, need time to regroup, repair, and recover. Ships need maintenance. The dead need to be honored. And decisions need to be made about what to do with the Ork fleet that's currently occupying space within the solar system. It's during this period that something unexpected happens. The two groups, forced into proximity by circumstance, begin to actually learn about each other. A custodian named Archimedes, whose ship was badly damaged in the battle, finds his vessel being approached by an Ork mech and his crew. The custodian's first instinct is to prepare for combat, but the Orks are carrying tools, not weapons. Through their improvised translation device, the mech makes his intentions clear. The custodian ship has good scrap, and some of it could be repurposed to help repair both vessels. Archimedes faces a choice. He could refuse, maintaining the barrier between Imperial and Xenos forces. Or he could accept, and acknowledging that they're both stuck in the same situation. He chooses pragmatism. You may take what you need from the destroyed sections, but touch anything critical to ship function, and the deal ends. The mech grins, his tusks gleaming. Deal, shiny git. Your stuff is proper quality, better than most Humie scrap. What follows is a strange few hours where custodians and Orks work in proximity, each focused on their own repairs, but occasionally crossing paths. The custodians can't help but observe how the Orks approach technology. There's no careful documentation, no precise measurements, no reverent prayers to the machine's spirit. They just grab pieces, slap them together, and somehow make them work. It violates every principle of the Mechanicus, and yet it functions. One young custodian, as having served for only 3 centuries and thus still somewhat curious about things beyond his training, asks the mech a question. How do you make it work? Your technology. It seems impossible by any standard of engineering I understand. The mech scratches his head, considering. You think too much, shiny boy. It works because we know it works. If you believe something is a gun and you made it like a gun, then it's a gun. Simple. But that's not how physics operates. You can't just believe something into functionality. The mech shrugs. Maybe for you lot, but we's Orks. We's different. Now stop jawing and hand me dat spanner. Similar interactions happen across the fleet. A group of Ork boys ends up on the same space station as a squad of Imperial Guard attempting to repair the defense batteries. At first, both groups eye each other warily, or weapons never quite pointed, but never quite safe either. But they're all tired, all hungry, and all aware that if the Chaos forces return before the defenses are restored, they're all dead. An orc sits down near a guardsman and pulls out something that might charitably be called food. The guardsman, against all his training and instincts, finds himself curious. What is that? Squig, good eatin'. Want some? I don't think that's appropriate. The orc shrugs and takes a massive bite, chewing noisily. After a moment, he speaks again. Your lot fought good back there. For humies, you ain't completely useless in a scrap. The guardsman, who has been drilled his entire life that orcs are mindless savages to be exterminated on sight, pauses. You're giving us a compliment. Don't get all mushy about it. You're still weak and squishy. But you stood your ground against them bugs. That's worth something. These small moments multiply across the fleet. Not friendship, certainly. Not even respect in any traditional sense. But something that might be called acknowledgement. The Custodians recognize that the orcs are, in their own chaotic way, exceptional warriors. The orcs recognize that the humies are tougher than they look, especially the golden ones. Valoris, learning of these interactions, calls a meeting of his senior commanders. This is unexpected. I anticipated that keeping the two forces from fighting each other would be our primary challenge. Instead, they're almost cooperating. Valdius nods. They're both warrior cultures at their core. They understand combat in ways that, for instance, the Tau or the Eldar do not. Fighting alongside someone, surviving impossible odds together, creates a bond even between species that should be mortal enemies. That bond is dangerous, another custodian warns. If the orcs begin to see humanity as anything other than enemies or obstacles, it could change the entire dynamic of our conflicts with them. And if word of this alliance spreads through the Imperium, the political and theological ramifications will be catastrophic. Valoris considers this, which is why this must remain as secret as possible. Only those directly involved will know, and when it's over, both sides will go their separate ways and never speak of it again. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried, especially when thousands of people know them. On Gruk Fasistomper's ship, now partially repaired with a combination of orc ingenuity and looted Imperial components, now the war boss holds his own council with his nobs. Those golden gits are proper ard. Saw one of them take down 5 Chaos boys by himself, and they don't run. Even when dem bugs was everywhere, they just kept fighting. One of his nobs grunts agreement. They's small, but they's tough, like really tough. And that shiny boss of theirs, the one who came to our ship, he ain't afraid of nothing. Looked me right in the eye and threatened me, he did. I respect that. Another nob, the clan's main mech, speaks up. Their tech is pretty good too. Not as fun as ours, but it works reliably. And some of that armor they got. I'd love to get me hands on some of that auramite stuff. Could make some proper good teeth from that. Gruk waves his power claw dismissively. That's all well and good, but remember, this was just one fight. One big, beautiful, amazing fight. But still just one. When this is over, we go back to normal. They go back to being humies we fight. We go back to being orcs they try to kill. That's how it works. But... He pauses, looking out at the stars. But maybe we remember that humies, least some of them, can be proper warriors when they need to be. Might make the next fight even better. This, perhaps, is the most significant cultural exchange that happens. Both sides gain a grudging recognition of the other's capabilities. The Custodians, who have spent 10,000 years viewing Xenos as inherently inferior and dangerous, find themselves unable to deny that the Orks are formidable fighters. The Orks, who generally view humans as either fun enemies or annoying obstacles, recognize that some humans, particularly the golden ones, are worthy opponents. And neither side softens their overall stance. The Custodians still believe Xenos must be eliminated for humanity's survival. The Orks still want to fight humanity because that's what Orks do. But there's a new layer of understanding there, one that's born from fighting alongside each other against forces that threatened both species' existence. Archimedes, the Custodian who worked alongside the mech, will later write in his personal journal, something that custodians rarely do. I fought beside Xenos today. This fact should fill me with shame and disgust, but I find myself instead considering the nature of our species' enemies. The Tyranids seek only consumption. Chaos seeks only corruption and destruction. Against such forces, even the most primitive warriors can become valuable allies, if only for a moment. Yet the Emperor built the Imperium on pragmatism as much as ideology. Perhaps this temporary alliance was more in line with his vision than we initially believed. Or perhaps I am simply attempting to justify actions that I know were heretical. I do not know. I know only that we survived, and that survival required compromise. The greater implications, as the immediate crisis passes and the combined fleet begins to recover, the implications of what has happened start to become clear to those involved. This alliance, temporary though it was meant to be, has changed fundamental equations in the galaxy's balance of power. The first and most obvious implication is for the Imperium itself. Word of the alliance, despite attempts to keep it secret, begins to spread. Space Marine chapters that fought alongside the Orks report what happened to their chapter masters. Imperial Guard regiments tell their commanders. Ship crews gossip. And across the Imperium, the response is predictably mixed. Conservative factions, particularly within the Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition, declare it heresy of the highest order. How dare the Custodians, of all people, ally with Xenos? How dare they sully the Emperor's vision with such collaboration? Calls for investigations, for trials, for someone to be held accountable fill the halls of terror. But other voices respond with pragmatic counter-arguments. Lord Commander Reboot Gilliman, one of the Emperor's returned Primarchs, and the closest thing the Imperium has to a supreme leader, Ainos makes his position clear when he addresses the High Lords. My father created the Custodians to make the hard choices, the ones that lesser beings cannot stomach. They chose survival over ideology. They chose pragmatism over dogma. And because of that choice, terror stands, the Emperor lives, and the Imperium endures. Any man who questions this decision is welcome to explain what they would have done differently, knowing that the alternative was extinction. His words don't end the controversy, but they do establish that the highest levels of imperial authority support what was done. This creates a precedent, a dangerous one perhaps, but a precedent nonetheless, that in the most extreme circumstances, even alliance with Xenos might be acceptable if the alternative is the fall of the Imperium itself. As the theological implications are even more complex, the imperial cult, which worships the Emperor as a god despite his own historical atheism, faces a serious challenge. If the Emperor's own guardians allied with Xenos, what does that say about the absolutist doctrine that all aliens must be purged? Does this suggest that the Emperor himself might have made similar compromises? Conservative theologians argue that this was a test of faith, that the Custodians failed, and that penance must be paid. More liberal interpretations suggest that the Emperor, in his divine wisdom, guided the Custodians to this decision, showing that his plan for humanity includes the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. Both sides quote scripture to support their positions, and neither can definitively prove their interpretation. What emerges from this theological debate is a subtle but significant shift in some imperial doctrine. The absolute prohibition on any cooperation with Xenos is quietly modified to allow for temporary alliances in the face of existential threats. This is hedged with dozens of restrictions, requirements for approval from multiple authorities, and stern warnings about the dangers of alien contamination. But the principle has been established. For the Orks, the implications are different but equally significant. The story of Gruk Fasistompa and his boys fighting alongside the Golden Humies spreads through Ork culture like wildfire. Ork storytellers, who pass on tales of great battles and mighty warriors, add this to their repertoire. It becomes legend, embellished with each retelling until it's hard to separate fact from fiction. Some Ork war bosses hear the tale and dismiss it as impossible nonsense. Humies and Orks fighting together? Against bugs and chaos? Ridiculous. But others hear it and think, If there was one time when it was worth allying with Humies, might there be other times? If the golden Humies are that tough, what would happen if we fought alongside them again? This creates a split in Ork culture that will persist for generations. Most Orks continue as they always have, fighting anyone and everyone with joyous abandon. But a few war bosses, particularly among the Blood Axes, who are already more cunning and willing to deal with other species, begin to see humanity differently. Not as friends or even truly as allies, but as potential partners for the kind of massive battles that make Ork hearts sing. Grook himself becomes a legendary figure among Orks. He's the war boss who fought at Terra, who boarded a hive ship, who stood beside the Emperor's own guardians in the biggest battle anyone could remember. His status among the Greenskins reaches heights rarely achieved, and wherever he goes, other Orks flock to his banner hoping for similar glory. The other Xeno species in the galaxy watch these developments with varying reactions. The Eldar, always concerned with the threads of fate and possible futures, see dangerous new patterns emerging. An Imperium, willing to ally with one Xenos species, even temporarily, might be willing to ally with others. Could this lead to a broader coalition against Chaos or the Tyranids? Or would it simply add chaos to an already unstable galaxy? The Tau, comps with their philosophy of the greater good that already includes accepting multiple species into their empire, see this as potential validation of their approach. If even the xenophobic Imperium can recognize the value of working with aliens when necessary, perhaps their isolationist stance will soften. This is probably overly optimistic, but the Tau have always been prone to hopeful interpretations. The Necrons, awakening in greater numbers across the galaxy, are less interested in the ideological implications and more focused on the tactical ones. If the Imperium and the Orks can temporarily combine forces, that represents a significant military threat to Necron tomb worlds. Strategic calculations must be updated, alliance patterns must be monitored, and the Tyranids and Chaos forces, or the two enemies that this alliance was formed to fight, learn their own lessons. The hive mind, that vast alien consciousness that guides the Tyranid swarms, adjusts its strategic approach. Humanity can call on unexpected reserves. Future invasions must account for the possibility of enemy cooperation. The hive fleet adapts, as it always does, preparing new strategies for next time. The Chaos forces, more capable of learning from specific defeats than the Tyranids, take note of what happened. The champion who led the assault, a Chaos Lord devoted to Tzeentch, plots and plans in the warp, considering how to turn this alliance against those who formed it. Could the Imperium be tricked into allying with Orks again, only to have that alliance corrupted? Could the Orks be manipulated into fighting the Custodians, turning former allies into bitter enemies? The Great Conspirator's servants are nothing if not creative. Back on Terra, in the quiet chambers of the Tower of Hegemon, Valoris meets with his closest advisors to discuss the long-term consequences of what they've done. "We've opened a door that cannot be easily closed," he acknowledges. "The precedent has been set. Future commanders facing similar circumstances may make similar choices. And each time, the absolute nature of the imperial truth erodes a little more." "Is that necessarily bad?" Valdius asks. The imperial truth, as it was taught during the Great Crusade, held that humanity must conquer the galaxy alone, without alien aid or technology. But that crusade failed. The heresy happened. The Emperor fell. Perhaps strict adherence to ideology is less important than practical survival. Another custodian, more conservative in outlook, disagrees. "Every compromise weakens us. Today we ally with Orks against Tyranids. Tomorrow we ally with Eldar against Chaos. Eventually, we're no longer the Imperium of Man, but some multi-species coalition that's lost its essential nature. The Emperor wanted humanity to stand alone, because only through self-reliance can we become what we're meant to be." The Emperor, Valoris says quietly, wanted humanity to survive. Everything else was in service to that goal. If we must compromise ideology to ensure survival, then we compromise. And we accept the consequences, whatever they may be. The debate continues long into the Terran night, and it's a debate that will continue for centuries across the Imperium. But the fundamental question has been answered. Yes, even the most zealous defenders of humanity can work with Xenos when extinction is the alternative. And that answer, once given, cannot be taken back. The inevitable end. 3 days after the battle, with most repairs completed and both fleets recovering their operational status, the time comes for the alliance to end. Both sides know this. It was always going to be temporary. The question is, how temporary arrangements dissolve when both parties are armed, exhausted, and have very different views on what happens next. Valoris initiates the final communication with Gruk Fasistompa. War Boss, our arrangement is complete. The threat has been repelled. As agreed, you are free to depart. There's a pause on the other end of the transmission. Then Gruk's voice, thoughtful in a way that Orks rarely are. Yeah, that was the deal, wasn't it? We fight together, then we go our separate ways. Gotta say, Shiny Boss, that was a proper good scrap. Best one I've had in years. Almost makes me sad it's over. The circumstances were unique. They will not occur again. Nah, probably not. But here's the thing. Now that I knows how tough you lot can be, how good a fight you can put up, part of me wants to fight you proper next time we meet. See how you do without dem bugs and chaos gets helping me out. Valoris's response is measured. If we meet again as enemies, War Boss, I will kill you. But I will remember that you kept your word here. That is worth something. Gruk laughs. Fair enough. Tell you what, I ain't gonna come back to Terra. At least not for a long time. Now, you lot fought too well for me to think I could take this place easy, and I don't like fights I can't win. But elsewhere in the galaxy, yeah, we'll probably fight again, and I'm gonna enjoy it, knowing you's actually a challenge. One more thing, Valoris adds. Any Ork who speaks of what happened here, who tells other species that we allied, even temporarily, that Ork will have made an enemy of all 10,000 Custodians. We will hunt them across the galaxy if necessary. Are we clear? Crystal, Shiny Boss. Orks like talking about fights, but we ain't stupid. This stays between us and the boys who was here. Though, he pauses again. Though it's gonna be hard not to brag about that hive ship boarding. That was brilliant. Keep it vague. Say you fought Tyranids near Terra. Don't mention working alongside Imperial forces. Done. All right. Time for us to go. See you around, Humi. Next time, try not to need saving. Next time, Ork, you'll be the enemy I'm saving humanity from. Looking forward to it. And with that, the strangest alliance in galactic history ends. The Ork fleet powers up its engines, such as they are, and begins the long process of leaving the solar system. They take their loot, their battle scars, and their stories of the greatest fight they've ever known. As they depart, there are no ceremonies, no formal farewells, no exchange of honors. That's not how relationships between the Imperium and Xenos work, even when those Xenos have just saved Terra. The Orks simply leave, and the Imperial forces simply let them go without firing a shot. But things are different now, in ways both subtle and profound. In the weeks that follow, the Custodians who participated in the battle find themselves changed by the experience. They don't speak of it often, even among themselves, but they carry the knowledge that the absolute certainties they were taught, the fundamental truths that shaped their existence, have been challenged. They survived by compromising those truths. Does that make them weaker, or does it make them more adaptable? Archimedes, in particular, struggles with this question. He begins to study reports of other instances where Imperial forces worked alongside Xenos, trying to find patterns, trying to understand if what they did was truly unique or merely an extreme example of a common necessity. His journals fill with philosophical questions that have no easy answers. Other Custodians handle it differently. Some double down on their xenophobia and declaring that the Alliance was a necessary evil that must never be repeated. Others, like Valdius, take a more nuanced view, suggesting that the Imperium's long-term survival may require occasional flexibility in dealing with threats too large to face alone. The Space Marine chapters that witness the alliance have their own reactions. Some, like the Black Templars, are appalled and view the entire incident as a stain on the honor of Terra. They file formal protests and increase their activities against Ork populations, as if trying to cleanse the shame through extra violence. Others, like the Ultramarines, take a more pragmatic view, noting the tactical success and filing it away as a possible strategy for future use in the most extreme circumstances. Among the common soldiers of the Imperial Guard, the reaction is simpler, but perhaps more honest. They're alive. They survived what should have been a completely hopeless battle. If allying with Orks for 3 days meant they could go home to their families, then so be it. Let the theologians and commanders worry about the implications. The soldiers just know that sometimes survival requires uncomfortable choices. On the Ork side, Grook keeps his word about not immediately returning to attack Terra. But he doesn't leave the region entirely. His fleet travels to nearby systems, always looking for the next good fight. And whenever he encounters Imperial forces, there's a moment of recognition, a brief pause before the fighting starts, as if both sides are remembering that things weren't always this way. Some of the Orks who fought at Terra split off from Grook's main force, forming their own warbands with stories of the Great Battle. These Orks become something unusual in greenskin culture, veterans who have fought alongside another species. They don't seek peaceful coexistence or some kind of permanent alliance, but they have a different understanding of the Humies, particularly the Golden Ones. They know that under the right circumstances, even traditional enemies can become temporary allies. This understanding ripples through Ork culture in strange ways. A war boss in another sector hears the tales and decides to approach an Imperial fortress world not with immediate violence, but with an offer. Fight alongside us against the Eldar, and we'll leave your world alone afterward. The offer is refused, and the Orks attack anyway, but the fact that the offer was made at all is significant. But the most important thing that both sides take away from the experience is knowledge. The Custodians now know that Orks, despite their primitive appearance and chaotic society, are capable of coordinated action when properly motivated. They're not mindless savages, but intelligent beings with their own culture and logic, even if that logic is completely alien to human understanding. The Orks, in turn, have learned that some Humies are far more dangerous than previously thought. The Golden Gits aren't just tough, they're brilliant, skilled, and absolutely dedicated to their cause. Future conflicts with Custodian forces will be approached with more respect, which paradoxically might make those conflicts even more dangerous as the Orks bring their full capabilities to bear. Perhaps the most poignant moment comes several months later, when Archimedes' ship encounters a small Ork raiding party in a contested system. The Orks, recognizing the golden armor of the Custodians, could easily flee or call for reinforcements. Instead, their leader, a relatively small knob with battle-scarred armor, opens a communication channel. "You the ones from Terra?" Archimedes, surprised by the question, responds, "We are Custodians. Some of us fought at Terra during the invasion, yes." "Fought beside Grook and Du Bois?" "Yes." The knob is quiet for a moment. Then, "That was a good fight. Best one ever. But now we enemies again, yeah? Proper enemies like we're supposed to be." "Yes," Archimedes confirms. "Now we're enemies." "Good. Would be weird any other way. But just so's you know, we's gonna bring our best. You lot deserve it, fighting like you do. Wouldn't be right to give you anything less." And then the communication cuts, and the battle begins. It's brutal, as all battles involving Custodians are. The Orks fight with ferocity and unusual coordination. The Custodians respond with precision and overwhelming force. In the end, the Custodians prevail, but only after harder fighting than they expected. As Archimedes walks through the aftermath, past the bodies of slain Orks, he reflects that this might be the true legacy of the Alliance. Not permanent peace or lasting friendship, both of which were always impossible, but a kind of respect, an acknowledgement that even enemies can recognize each other's worth. The fight is still to the death. The fundamental opposition remains, but there's an understanding now that wasn't there before. The alliance ended, as it always had to. Yet the circumstances that made it necessary were unique, unlikely to ever occur again. And both sides returned to their normal state of hostility as the galaxy demanded. But they were changed by it, in ways large and small, obvious and subtle. And those changes would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Conclusion. Lessons from the impossible. As we come to the end of this exploration of what may be the most unlikely alliance in Warhammer 40,000 history, it's worth reflecting on what this hypothetical scenario teaches us about the universe and the nature of its conflicts. The first and perhaps most important lesson is that in the grim darkness of the far future, survival sometimes requires compromise. The Imperium prides itself on its absolute principles, its unwavering dedication to human supremacy, and its total rejection of alien cooperation. But absolute principles only work when you have the luxury of not facing extinction, when the choice is between compromising your ideals or watching everything you've built crumble to dust. Even the most zealous defenders of humanity might choose survival. This doesn't mean that the Imperium's xenophobia is somehow unjustified or wrong within the context of the setting. The galaxy is hostile. Most alien species would genuinely prefer to see humanity enslaved, consumed, or destroyed. The Imperium's paranoia is born from 10,000 years of being proven right about the dangers of the wider galaxy. But even justified paranoia can become a trap if it prevents rational response to changing threats. The second lesson is about the nature of the Orks themselves. And it's easy to dismiss them as comic relief in the setting, as the faction that provides dark humor in an otherwise unrelentingly grim universe. But this scenario reminds us that Orks are perhaps the most successful species in the galaxy. They're everywhere, they reproduce faster than they can be killed, and they're individually tougher and stronger than almost any other infantry unit in the game. They're not just dangerous. They're existentially threatening in a way that equals or exceeds the Tyranids if they ever truly unified. And yet, they're also comprehensible in ways that other threats are not. Orks fight because they love fighting. Their motivation is simple, direct, and in its own way, honest. You can work with that, at least temporarily, because you can understand it. Contrast this with the Tyranids, as who want only to consume all biomass, or chaos, which seeks only to corrupt and destroy. The Orks, for all their violence, are at least predictable. The third lesson is about the Custodians and what they represent. We often think of them as rigid, bound by ancient codes, and unable to adapt to changing circumstances. But this scenario suggests something different. The Custodians are the Emperor's companions, his counselors, warriors who were designed to think and make judgments rather than simply follow orders. If anyone in the Imperium could see the necessity of a temporary alliance with Xenos and make that choice, it would be them. This doesn't make them hypocrites or traitors to the Imperial vision. It makes them pragmatists who understand that the ultimate goal is humanity's survival and eventual triumph, but not adherence to specific tactics or strategies. The Emperor himself made alliances of convenience during the Great Crusade, worked with Xenos technology when it served his purposes, and adjusted his approach as circumstances required. The Custodians, in making this choice, would be following his example rather than violating it. The fourth lesson is about the power of shared adversity. The alliance between Custodians and Orks works, in our scenario, not because they suddenly develop mutual respect or shared values, but because they're both facing threats that dwarf their mutual hostility. The Tyranids don't care if you're human or Ork. They'll consume you either way. Chaos will corrupt anyone who shows weakness, regardless of species. Against such enemies, the traditional boundaries between friend and foe become temporarily irrelevant. And this is why the alliance can only be temporary. Once the immediate threat passes, the fundamental incompatibility between the two species reasserts itself. Humans and Orks can't coexist peacefully. Their basic natures prevent it, but they can set aside their conflict long enough to deal with worse problems, and that's enough. The fifth and final lesson is about the nature of honor and warrior codes. Both Custodians and Orks, despite being completely different in almost every way, share something fundamental. They're both warriors who take pride in their combat prowess and who respect strength and courage. This common ground, thin as it is, provides just enough basis for temporary cooperation. They don't need to like each other or understand each other's culture. They just need to recognize that they're both committed to fighting rather than surrendering or fleeing. This hypothetical alliance, impossible as it seems at first glance, turns out to be perhaps the most plausible of all the unlikely alliances we could imagine in Warhammer 40,000. More so than Imperium and Tau, who have completely incompatible philosophies of governance. More so than Imperium and Eldar, who carry 10,000 years of mutual atrocities and betrayals. The Custodians and Orks, united by the simple reality that they're both warriors facing an impossible fight, could find that thin thread of shared interest and pull it tight enough to hold for just a few crucial days. And in those few days, they could accomplish what neither could achieve alone: survival against overwhelming odds. The cost would be high. Though the theological and political implications would reverberate for centuries. The alliance itself would end the moment the immediate threat passed, but they would survive. And in the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, where the alternative to survival is extinction or worse, that matters more than anything. So what would happen if the Custodians and Orks became allies? They would fight together with brutal efficiency. They would surprise themselves and everyone else by how well they could coordinate when properly motivated. They would win against enemies that should have destroyed them, and then they would return to being enemies, forever changed by the knowledge that even the most fundamental hostilities can be set aside when extinction is the alternative. And it's a sobering thought and a powerful reminder of what makes Warhammer 40,000 such a compelling setting. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes, just sometimes, that war creates such terrible threats that even eternal enemies must fight side by side. And when they do, for just a brief moment, the impossible becomes real. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of the galaxy's most unlikely hypotheticals. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what could happen when gold meets green, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more stories to tell from the Warhammer 40,000 universe, scenarios to explore, and questions to answer. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, even the impossible is just another Tuesday when survival is at stake, for the Emperor, and maybe, just this once, for the biggest fight in the galaxy.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any, and yeah, sleep well.